Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
In 1914, the entire world would be at war. And with the world being at war, many Americans would enlist into the military service to defend their country. And because the country was at war, many Americans would be leaving their homes and would be joining to serve in the military. Which would mean that a lot of businesses and companies would not have the bodies at their works that they typically had. And most of those workers, because of the times, would be white Americans. And most of these jobs had to be filled, so at the time, they would actually enlist in these job corporations African Americans to fill in these job openings. But not every African American would be staying at home during while the world was at war. America would also enlist African American soldiers to join in the fight. And over 367,000 African Americans would actually take up arms and help defend the country. This, of course, would have very mixed emotions during the time, as many African American families would believe, why would you want to defend a country that did not do anything to defend you? This is during a time when segregation and racism was at its peak. So many African American families would actually migrate from the southern states where they were from up to the northern parts of the states, mainly in Chicago, to fill in these jobs that were completely empty. Most of these jobs would be from factories to railroads. And unfortunately, after World War I would end, the problems would not stop there, as a lot of these white Americans would come home thinking that they could get their jobs back. But the African American families that had been working in these jobs for the past 9 years were not willing to give up these jobs that they had been working, as they were using these jobs to provide for their families. This incident would go down and be referred to as the Red Summer of 1919. Where over 25 race riots would go down and multiple lives would be lost. Now, because a lot of the African Americans did not want to give up their jobs, there would be a lot of white supremacy type riots going on because they weren't giving up the jobs. Where not only were the men who were working at these jobs were threatened at these job places, but their families would be threatened at their homes. And because racism was so thick during the times, they would not have any help from law enforcement. And because they had no help from law enforcement, the men who actually did serve in World War I would actually start taking up arms as a way to defend their families in a type of militia. But unfortunately, it was going to get much worse, when a 17-year-old boy by the name of Eugene Williams would actually build a raft in a beach. And this would happen in Chicago. On this particular summer in 1919, Eugene Williams would actually be building a raft and would be floating on the waters. And as I said before, this is during a very segregated time. And while he was on his raft would actually float from the African American side to the actual white side, to where some angry onlookers would actually start throwing rocks at Eugene Williams. One of these rocks would actually hit Eugene Williams in the head, and he would actually fall into the water and drown. And over 1,000 onlookers would actually see white Americans stoning 17-year-old Eugene Williams. The family and the onlookers would actually go to the police and ask for assistance for the crime that was committed, and they would do absolutely nothing. This would be the tipping scale of the Red Summer of 1919, where multiple race riots would ensue. The riots would happen all over America, where thousands were injured and hundreds were unalived, which would leave just another grim reminder of all the struggles that African Americans faced with the civil rights building up to the day that we live in now. And you're probably thinking to yourself, what does this have to do with today's story? And sadly, everything. An incident that would occur where 11 African American women would unfortunately lose their lives. And even more shocking is the fact that all of these things could have been prevented if it were not for the bigotry and the racism of the Cleveland, Ohio police. This is the story of Anthony Sowell. Anthony Sowell would be born on August 19th, 1959. He would be one of 7 children born to his mother, Claudia Garrison, and they would reside in Cleveland, Ohio. Anthony would not just live with his mother and his 7 siblings, as it said at some point, Claudia's sister would actually lose her life, unfortunately, to an illness, to where her 7 children would actually move into the home of Claudia Garrison. And it is said that the upbringing in this home would not be a very healthy one. Leona Davis, one of Anthony Sowell's nieces, would actually paint a very dark picture on what and how living with Claudia was like, where she would say that Claudia was extremely abusive to her nieces and nephews that would come to live with her. She would recall on one occasion where she would actually make Leona strip down completely naked, to where she would beat her with an extension cord until she would actually bleed. And Claudia would actually make her children, including Anthony Sowell, watch this from their adjacent rooms. But Leona would recall that Claudia was not the only monster that would live in this household, where she would recall that Anthony Sowell had a very aggressive nature, and when she was only 10 years old, Anthony Sowell would actually grape her. But she would recall this as a very normal thing, as not only Anthony Sowell, but his other brothers and the other men in the family had a habit of not only touching, but also graping the women in this household as well. But it is said at some point, Anthony Sowell would actually join the military when he was 18 years old. On January 24th, 1978, Anthony Sowell would actually enlist in the Marine Corps. And this would actually be a good thing for Anthony Sowell, as he did fairly well in the Marine Corps and would actually be in the Marine Corps for 7 years until his discharge on January of 1985. It would have been really great if Anthony Sowell had actually turned his life around. Maybe the events would not have transpired that actually transpired. But unfortunately, he would leave the Marine Corps, and this is where, unfortunately, everything would go downhill. In 1989, a 3-month-old pregnant woman would actually turn Anthony Sowell into the police. She would claim that she would be leaving Anthony Sowell's residence, where he would tie and bound her with ties and belts. He would also use a rag to gag her, and he would actually grape this 3-month pregnant woman. She would tell the police that he started choking her really hard, and then would say that her body would start tingling all over, and she was afraid that Anthony Sowell was going to unalive her. And in 1990, Anthony Sowell was charged with kidnapping, grape, and attempted grape. And because of the severity of the crimes, he probably would have served a longer term. But because of his record in the military, in the Marines, they would only sentence him to 15 years, where he was released in 2005. Anthony Sowell would actually be released from prison, and he would begin working factory work until about 2007, when he would start collecting unemployment benefits. Anthony Sowell's neighbors would say it's around this time that he would start earning a living by selling scrap metal. But they too would start turning him into the health department, as they would claim that there was an odd smell coming from the home. The neighbors would say that the smell was extremely foul, and even his girlfriend, Lori Frazier, would actually complain and say that not just outside the house, but inside the house would smell like unalive bodies. Sowell would tell his girlfriend that the smell actually came from his stepmother when she had moved out. Sowell's neighbors would also say that he was a member from an online dating service, claiming that he was a master and was looking for someone to dominate and train. But his online endeavors would be nothing compared to the true house of horrors that police would later find.